Hello guys and welcome back to my channel. And in today's video we are continuing to discuss about the CloudFormation. Yesterday we have discussed the parameters, and today we are going to discuss in detail about the resource block. Although we have discussed this thing previously where we have configured a resource using a resource block. But today we are going to discuss in detail about the components of resource block. Okay, so as I'm following the Amazon documentation, so I prefer that you also need to use this one, as this is a tool from AWS or service by AWS. So I prefer that instead of using some others, it's better you use the source. All right, so let's define the resource block. So the resource is a important section of a CloudFormation, as it is a required top level section in a CloudFormation template. It declares the AWS resources that you want CloudFormation to provision and configure as a part of your stack. So pretty much we know all the definitions of CloudFormation, which we have just seen here in this line. Like you know what stack is, you know what CloudFormation is, and how it can provision and configure the resources. But one thing which I want to discuss is resource. When we are discussing in our Amazon Web Services, you can say essential course, we have not discussed about resource. We are talking about services, and where we are using word a resource. So basically in the CloudFormation definition, or in the CloudFormation, we are using the word resource to define the service. And resource, basically you are creating a resource. It is just like a service, and but it will be used alternatively. So let's talk about different components of this resource. Okay, as I am continue using YAML language, so I will be discussing the uh, YAML syntax. Okay, it is like a block where you can see which you have to define this resource as a block. So you need to start with resources, and inside the resources, you mention the first thing, which is the logical name of that resource. Okay, and just for your information, you can create as many resources as they're supported in the AWS. Okay, there's no limitation from AWS on this resource numbers. Uh, Officially, they are supporting around 240 resources. It is not just like it is covering the. So when we are talking about services, let's say talk about EC2 as a service. In EC2, we said that this is a virtual machine. But when we talk about in CloudFormation language, we are defining the compute as a separate resource. We are defining security group as a separate resource. We are defining Elastic IP as a separate resource. So this is how you don't need to worry about that. We have less services in AWS, but why the resource number is so high? So basically, in this CloudFormation, you are dividing all the components of EC2 as a different resource, and then you are referencing to those resources inside the main service. This is how you can formulate different things. So we will talk about the resource here, and you can define many services or many resources inside the block. And next to this logical resource name, you have to define the type. What is the type of this resource? Then you're talking about the properties of that resource. So in YAML, it is very easy. You just need to define like the key pair method, and it's quite straightforward. And you just need to take about small indentations, not that much. So let's go and discuss what is the logical resource name, what is type, and how we get the properties and those details. Okay. So logical ID, which is also known as logical name of a resource. So within a CloudFormation template, resources are identified by their logical resource names, and these names must be alphanumeric. So there are two things. These are the actual resource name, logical resource name, and the name should be alphanumeric, and they should be unique within the template. Logical names are used to reference resource from other section of the template. So as we are creating different resources under the resource block, so quite possible if we are creating S3 bucket in the resource, that might be in some other resource, we are going to reference that S3 bucket. For example, in the beginning, we have created S3 bucket, and later on, when we are deploying a CloudFront resource, we are referencing to that particular bucket in that CloudFront configuration. So this is quite possible. I will discuss about two important functions here as we proceed. All right, then comes the resource type. So every resource comes with a specific or unique type. Each resource must have a type, then its attributes, which defines the kind of AWS resource it is, right? For example, we are discussing about, yesterday we have discussed about EC2 instance, right? So instance has its compute type. If we are defining about S3 bucket, then it is refers to as this will be the type, okay? And you can get all these configurations or information from this CloudFormation documentation. Okay, you can see for the list of supported resource type, see this resource documentation. You can just go to that link and you can see all the resources that are supported by AWS. All right, next come the resource properties. So let's say we have last time we have discussed about EC2. In EC2 we have defined the type. First comes the logical name, then we have defined type, and then we have defined, okay, so what is the AMI? Then we have defined what is the instance type. Okay, so these are the properties of that particular resource. So let's come to the AWS definition. Resource type, resource properties are additional options that you can specify to define configuration details for a specific resource type. One thing which is important to understand, if you are going to the resource property one by one, let's say yesterday when we are talking about EC2 instance, we just need two properties to deploy the EC2 instance, right? We don't need to define all the properties of the resource. Otherwise, it is not, you can say it's not easy to go through all these things. So you don't need to define all the properties. If you go to the documentation, you will see that which property is required and which is not required. Okay. So this is about, let's say this is a property, and then comes the information. Again, in the property, you have to define the type of that property. Then you have to define different, like it is what is a Boolean type. So we can define as a list, whatever. So it all depends how that property needs that information to be put in. So it depends on resource to resource. Now come to the physical ID. We have discussed so far the logical ID, which is used not only to recognize or identify a resource inside the CloudFormation template, but it also helps to reference to that particular uh, resource inside any other resource. But this is another ID of the same resource, but it is not supported by all the resources. Some resources want to have the physical ID. So in addition to the logical ID, certain resources also have a physical ID, okay, which is the actual assigned name for that resource. For example, you might have heard about a service which is you can say, let's say lambda function, okay. So lambda function, when you are going to define this as a source in the template, then it has a logical ID, okay, and then you also going to define its physical ID as well, which can be the name of the actual resource, which you can see in the when it is deployed, okay. So that is the physical ID and referencing resource. Okay, now comes the important functions. So we have two very important functions. One function where we are actually using, we want to use a resource that is created already. We want to refer to that particular resource. So that can be done by using the reference function. Okay, this is basically we have two intrinsic functions. So one is reference function, and the other one is if you are going to use some of the attribute inside the some other, you can say you are going to create a resource where you want to use the attribute of that particular resource, then you use get attribute reference function, you get attribute intrinsic function. Okay, let's say you are going to create an EC2 instance, right? You have defined the IP address of that particular EC2 instance. That IP is the attribute of that particular EC2 machine. Might be you need to define or you want to get attribute of that particular EC2 in some other resource. So you will be using get attribute over there. Or otherwise, let's say what example this particular interface given is get attribute function. So here you can see that it is giving you example. You want to create a cloud front distribution with an S3 origin. Okay, you need to specify the bucket location by using a DNS style address. Okay, so in order to get this thing, because you have defined S3, but you want to get this bucket location, this will be defined as attribute. Okay, it is not defined, but it is created, and uh, you can then get that information using the attribute. Okay, might be they have given the example, so let's go through the example. Here, you have pretty much idea about the reference function because yesterday when we have talked about the parameters, I have referred to the parameters value using the reference function. So it is same like inside this resource. Or let me see if they have given the example here. So yes, okay. So for example, they have created a resource property name is one. Here defining the logical resource name. This is how you can actually call that particular you can say resource. So it is reference then logical name. I am using. I'm not a big fan of this particular way to define the reference. I just use the property name and as a value I just use exclamation mark reference and then define the logical reference resource name. This is what I pretty much do. And same thing I will be using for get attribute. So get attribute example is something we will see here. Here it is using this get attribute function. So in the resource, it is creating one particular resource. You can see that it is type S3 bucket. Okay. It is the logical name and this is the type. And it has not defined any other property of this particular resource. It should be fine. Maybe for S3 bucket, we don't need to define any of the properties. And then come my distribution. This is not another resource logical ID, and the type is cloud for distribution. So here we are going to define the origin, and here we are using the bucket origin with the help of get attribute. Okay, so this is all about resource, and we have already created this in the last example. So pretty much, I just want to give you an overview about the resource block as well. And in the next section, we will define about outputs. So keep learning and keep watching. And if you have any issues, please let me know in the comment section. So thank you so much. And if you think that this particular course is helping you to learn anything new, please like and subscribe to this channel as this will really give us some motivation to make new videos. So thank you so much. Have fun.